Hey, welcome back to another episode. I am your storyteller and on-record technician with more late-night calls than sleep. And a quick note before we start, if you sent a story this week, it might show up here. So thank you for trusting this channel. Ever heard of the elevator game? A ritual people say will take you somewhere else if you press floors in a certain order and avoid looking back. What if those instructions were actually a map to something that lives in the wiring and the shafts of the buildings where we work? Today, we are going to hear 4 real accounts from people who found out the hard way that some games should not be treated like myth. If you have an encounter like this, send it to the address in the description and start your message with the floor numbers you remember. Also, quick aside, I am testing a new coffee blend for those all-nighters, so if the voice sounds extra bitter, that is why. Pay attention to the first report because the panel did something it had no right to do. I have been a maintenance tech for almost 12 years. I grew up in a building near the river where my father taught me to take things apart and put them back together. As a kid, I watched him fix door closers and radios, his hands always stained with grease and battery acid. I studied electrical maintenance at the community college, took night classes while working at a hardware store, and later apprenticed under a supervisor named Richard who taught me to respect schematics and to never ignore a smell. The turning point for me was losing my mother to an illness when I was 19. After that, I threw myself into work because it was predictable and it allowed me to be useful in a world that suddenly felt fragile. I learned to read a relay like others read a face, to hear a failing bearing and know when to swap a capacitor before it smoked. That history matters because when something impossible happens on the job, I filter it first through tools and protocol. I am not someone who believes in ghosts by instinct. I believe in checklists and in shutting down breakers before touching panels. But the stories I am about to tell pushed those systems to their limits and made me question what lives in buildings after hours. The first call came at 02:15 on a Wednesday. It was from the front desk of a municipal office building downtown that has more history than it deserves. The building has a freight elevator with a worn brass plate, cables feeding into a concrete housing, and a control cabinet down in the pit that Jerry the janitor always complained about. I arrived with my kit and flashlight, the smell of old grease and wet concrete filling the stairwell. The desk clerk, Linda, looked pale. She said the elevator had stopped between floors and the car was reporting a floor that did not exist on the panel. I remember the first sound, 3 distinct knocks coming from the shaft as if someone tapped the metal with a knuckle. Linda said in a small voice, "I heard it too." Then it answered back with 3 knocks. I racked my toolbox and pulled a headlamp over my cap. My hands smelled like solvent, and the strap of my bag bit into my shoulder. The metal as a door felt cold and slightly damp when I tested the manual release. There was a faint scent like burnt sugar and old coinage from the motor, a pressure in the ears from the shaft, and a taste of copper in my mouth, like when you bite your tongue. I called down to Richard, who was on call, and he told me to secure the door, lock out the circuit, and pull the emergency key. The manager, Priya, hovered behind Linda and kept checking the security feed on her tablet. We agreed to follow procedure before we opened anything. Inside the control cabinet, I ran a standard diagnostic, and it returned a checksum error I had never seen. I described the sequence to Richard on the radio. He asked me to isolate the relay and cycle the main breaker, while he added he was likely dealing with a corrupted control module. The procedure requires us to lock off power, remove the panel cover, label wires with tape, test the continuity of the cable runs, and then swap a suspect relay with a known good unit from a service kit. The full step-by-step is exacting. Open the door to the control housing, use insulated glugs to test for live voltage at the contactor, apply a short pulse to the coil, verify dropout, measure resistance at the brake, inspect the travel limit switches, and finally perform a controlled manual descent using the manual control wheel while observing feedback from the position encoder. We document serial numbers and maintain a trip log in case the manufacturer needs a warranty claim. It is boring work, but it prevents bad outcomes. That night, the lights on the panel blinked in a rhythm that matched the knock. The meter read normal voltages, but the control relay clicked in patterns that did not correspond to any command we were sending. The first story escalated in the car. I opened the emergency hatch and shone light down. The brass plate where the floor numbers should have been had an extra dim set of digits that were not on the schematic. The car replied again with 3 knocks after I tapped the top corner to try to establish an acoustic signature. Linda and Priya both stepped back. Then a voice, muffled and childlike, said hello through the speaker that had been dead for months. I called out, thinking it was a prank. Mike, the security guard, turned from the monitor and said, he saw the elevator move 1 floor up, and then the cameras that usually point at the hallway showed static, like VHS tracking gone wrong. The smell intensified to something like burning motor oil mixed with wet cardboard. When I reached in to pull the manual brake, the strap of my glove snagged, and I felt a pressure on my shoulder, as if someone leaned into me. I asked aloud who was there, and 3 knocks answered right above us. The audience might be expecting a spectral occupant, but something in that shaft sounded patient and expert. We had the required witnesses. It was not in the log to be moving. The camera timestamps did not align with the control signals. I took off my glove and wiped sweat away. The hairs on my arm were standing up. If this already gives you chills and you want to share a similar late-night knock you heard on site, tell the story in the comments, starting with the words banged 3 times so I can find it. You are not alone in being unsettled. Now back to what happened that night. We tried to calm things using protocol and common sense. Tom from electronics and Javier, the junior tech, arrived and we ran a physical inspection of the hoist ropes and the travel limiter. We had a conversation full of technical jargon and fear. I remember Javier saying, maybe someone pressed a hidden floor, and Tom answering, no, it is like the encoder is counting wrong. And Mike chiming in, you keep saying encoder like that makes sense to the knocks. There were 10 back and forths at least as we debated whether to pull the car out with the cradle or call the manufacturer. At one point, Linda demanded we stop fiddling and just close the shaft door. She warned us not to play games with mechanical things that smell like burnt sugar. I argued with Richard over the radio about whether to power cycle the control board. He told me to be careful and not to test any manual maneuvers without a safety observer. We argued and then agreed. The tension built because every decision seemed to create a ripple in the system. The second account happened in a diner kitchen, where a coffee machine displayed a floor number on its tiny screen, and a cook swore it was following the elevator game sequence. Rosa, the owner, texted a former appliance repair guy named Leo after midnight because the industrial brewer would not stop flashing. The machine would brew, then stop, then brew again with no water flow, and the small panel that usually shows temperature would read 421, then 241 in the exact rhythm of an old urban sheet describing the game. There were metallic hisses and the smell of scorched sugar. The cook named Anna put her hand on the machine and felt a cool pressure, like someone pushing and then releasing. It performed a diagnostic for commercial coffee equipment, which involves checking the heating element resistance, verifying the boiler pressure switch, tracing the low-voltage control board for short circuits, and inspecting the relay bank for welded contacts. Each step is documented, and the board is photographed before touching to preserve evidence. The heat of the burner, the oily film on the counters, the sting of coffee steam on the tongue, the clatter of pots and the hum in the fluorescent lights all formed a sensory backdrop to something that could not be explained by a flaky thermostat. The third story was at a demolition site. A new elevator we installed was being tested after we replaced the traction sheave. The crew included Maria, the foreperson, Jose, the rigger, and Anthony, who was in charge of safety. We had removed the car and were doing a motor run on the installed controller. At around dusk, the temporary service panels started showing floors beyond the site blueprints, and the temporary hoist cables sang with harmonics that should not exist for the load we were applying. Jose swore that he saw a door open in the scaffold that had no frame. The air tasted of sawdust and rust. We had an 8 exchange conversation arguing whether to stop the test or keep going. We kept going, and then the pulley froze, and the relays started to chatter like teeth. Anthony cut power with the kill switch, and the silence after the cut was louder than the noise had been. We all stood in the dust, breathing with our mouths open. The fourth incident took place in a hospital freight elevator where patients were not supposed to be after midnight. I was on call and had to check on an elevator that had been stopping at the morgue floor without a request. Names here are important because witnesses matter. The night nurse, Sarah, called in and told us the car had opened on an unlisted basement level. I met with Dr. Patel, who signed the access forms while I inspected the door seals and the fuse panel. The smell was antiseptic and something sweeter beyond that, like lilies left too long. The keypad showed inputs that were not registered in the control console. We tried to replicate the sequence, and each time the car answered with a single slow knock on the steel skin. I felt a vibration in my chest like when a big truck passes. The headlight of my flashlight caught dust motes that seemed to hang for an extra beat, and a faint hum under the building filled the elevator shaft. The hospital administrator, Linda, not to be confused with the desk clerk earlier, refused to have patients moved through that shaft until we found out what was happening. Across these 4 stories, certain patterns emerged, and I want to draw your attention to the technical oddities before we get to the patterns that felt like the building itself had agency. In each case, panels blinked in sequences that did not match the control inputs. Cameras either froze or showed frames that were 1 second ahead or behind the timecode. Relays would click at intervals that matched human taps. The smell of grease or burnt sugar or floral preservatives seemed to precede the event. Tools acted up. A cordless work light had its battery drained in minutes despite showing full charge moments before. These are the facts we could document. Now I need to pause and explain a repair procedure we used that night because it matters for evidence and because some will call these things anomalies when sometimes they are wiring faults. When isolating a control board for an elevator with a suspected corrupted input, we performed this sequence. First, we locked out the main service and affixed tags to breakers. We then removed the controller cover and took photos. We used a non-contact voltage tester to verify isolation. After that, we checked the position encoder by gently rotating the manual wheel and watching the encoder feed on a test meter. We checked continuity on the safety interlocks and verified the state of the travel limit switches. If the encoder or position feedback was inconsistent, we would clamp a known good sensor in place and run a controlled move at walk speed while monitoring current draw for the motor as well as the brake coil holding voltage. Each step was logged, including serial numbers for relays and the torque value for the brake bolts. That way, if the manufacturer needed to see what we had done, we could show an unbroken chain of custody from initial report to corrected repair. It is boring, but it kept us grounded until things stopped being mechanical. Tension built into moments that forced decisions we could not unwind. The first moment was at the municipal building when I put my hand on the control relay and felt the skin temperature change beneath my glove. We were deciding whether to pull the entire module and take it to the shop. I remember Richard telling me over the radio, "You are not touching that alone," and my voice replying, "I am not alone because everyone is right here." The knocks came in sequence and the security monitor flashed like someone was moving a spotlight around the shaft. My breath was loud in my ears. I reached into the box, and the metal edge cut the pad of my thumb. Blood ran warm into my glove. For a second, the world narrowed to the feel of the tape on the wires and the smell of motor grease. Then the speaker of the elevator emitted a whisper that sounded like a name. It was like the building recognized me. That was the first tension moment, and it lasted until we left that night with the elevator locked out. A second high-tension moment happened in the diner. Rosa and Anna were adamant we unplugged a coffee machine. Leo insisted we capture the board readings before cutting power. We argued back and forth with 8 or 9 exchanges about risk versus documentation. The machine flashed numbers that looked like coordinates, and then a handprint of steam appeared on the ceramic cup as if someone had just put their palm there. The sound of the hood fan blocked words, and then it stopped, and the kitchen was small and very loud in a different way. I grabbed the control panel with gloves and felt static climb the arm hair. The team wanted to pray, to smudge the area, to call someone. We did everything, and none of it unmade that mark on the cup. It was an image in the world now, and not in our heads. That pressure and the fight over protocol created a long, cold beat in which everyone reevaluated what their job meant. The third tension moment was at the demolition site when the hoist cable vibrated and Jose swore something pulled at his harness. He looked at Maria and said, "I felt fingers on the back of my neck." Anthony called out, "Cut power now," and Maria moved to the kill switch. We had 3 or 4 people jockeying for authority and safety lines at the same time. The scaffolding groaned, and the skyline went purple with dusk. I remember the taste of dust and the metallic tang of nerves. When we cut power, the motor still coasted for an extra half turn, and then the noise was gone, and everyone laughed too loud, as if laughter could ventilate the fear. That moment forced us to stop work for the night and to file an incident report none of us expected to write. After each event, we took steps both practical and strange. We ran complete electrical inspections and documented anomalies. We smudged bits of the site, in the diner, and at the municipal building with sage, because someone insisted it made them feel safer, despite no technical reasoning. In the hospital, we brought in a licensed inspector, and we pulled camera feeds with time-synchronized logs. Some of the solutions were mundane. We replaced relays that were pitted from micro-arcing, replaced worn encoder rings, and tightened terminal blocks that had tiny hairline shorts. In the demolition site, we refitted the temporary drive and checked the sheave alignment. In each case, these actions reduced the immediate anomalies, but did not erase what people had felt. Rosa started keeping a devotional candle near the coffee machine. Mike, the security guard, began refusing to be on night shifts alone. Maria delayed the demo for a week. The social consequences were real. Richard was accused of being too conservative when he suggested shutting a shaft permanently until an OEM review. Priya lost tenants who complained about safety and asked for refunds. Linda, the night nurse, took leave after she had trouble sleeping and now avoids the basement stairs. Javier took his certification exam later, and then moved to a different city because the night shift felt different to him. Leo refuses to touch that coffee machine again and still gets chills when he sees a brew cycle. Names matter because these are lived experiences, not just technical anomalies on a log. The company filed insurance claims, the city inspector wrote an official notice, and the hospital had a temporary reroute for patient movement. Some of those steps were pragmatic. Some were attempts to draw a line between measurable failure and the feeling of being watched. When it calmed down, we tried to understand patterns. The number sequences on panels corresponded to known elevator game orders and folklore. There was the sequence of presses and knocks, and a repeated insistence on never looking back when the doors close. The cultural thread is important because employees in multiple locations had heard urban legends about elevators that go to nowhere and about visitors that will follow you home if you let them. People dismissed the game as stupid until it seemed to show up as a mechanical signature. We could not prove causation, and we documented everything we could. We also took steps that are unorthodox for our trade. We placed a small book of reflections at the municipal building elevator lobby, one of those tiny Bibles, after Priya suggested putting something human at the base of the shaft may make the space feel claimed again. Miguel, the chaplain, came in and said a few words, and later mentioned that ritual and checking wiring are not mutually exclusive. 1 month later, the municipal building had one recorded repeat incident. The maintenance log showed a door opening to a service floor that did not exist according to blueprints. The city inspector, Vernon, wrote a note that said, "Unknown floor event still under investigation." Jerry, the janitor, told a coworker named Kendra that he had seen a shadow in the maintenance corridor and would not go down there alone. People avoided that elevator. The insurance company requested a full electrical audit. In the diner, there was a small viral clip of the coffee machine flashing that someone filmed and uploaded. Rosa received a call that a supplier would not deliver until they replaced the machine entirely. The demolition site resumed after contractors installed heavier temporary bracing, and Jose requested religious items tied to his harness for comfort. The hospital moved freight entirely to a different shaft and installed a secondary camera with independent recording. That month was a test of normal operations and a negotiation between fear and the need for business continuity. 3 months out, the municipal building had a partial solution. The elevator shaft was closed for structural reinforcement, and we installed a new OEM controller and a redundant encoder. We documented the serial numbers and kept a sealed file with all the incident timestamps. Some of the anomalies receded. The knocks stopped for a while. Linda returned to night duty, but she kept a small flashlight on her key ring that she said she would never turn off in a stairwell. In the diner, the new owner replaced smashed panels with a custom cured steel surface and hired Leo as a consultant to guard the new equipment. He accepted, but only on afternoon shifts. The demolition crew returned with a new safety plan and an added counselor hour for anyone who wanted to talk. The hospital decided to reroute ceremonial deliveries and instituted a requirement that 2 people must be present for any late-night rides in freight elevators. People adapted. They also told new workers not to joke about the game. 6 months later, the story had become something like a legend in its own right. The municipal elevator shaft had a small plaque on the door acknowledging the outage and reading out the dates of the incident and the contractors involved, as if a bureaucracy were trying to ritualize the unknown. Richard left the company for a quieter job and texted me months later saying he still hears faint mechanical clicks in his sleep. Priya moved to a different building after tenants sued and the city settled quietly. Rosa had a small shrine in the diner corner that people left coffee grounds on. Mike, the security guard, changed shifts permanently. Javier visited me once and brought a box of tools he thought would be lucky. Anthony took his certification to instructor level, and in every class he taught, he used parts of our incident as a cautionary tale about procedure and humility. The community around these workplaces had been altered. People compared notes. Someone posted an analysis online matching the sequences we observed to folklore pages about the elevator game. The comments mixed skepticism and stories. Some people thanked us for documenting and said they would be more careful. Others accused us of manufacturing fear for attention. If you work in maintenance or in night shifts, take practical steps. Log each anomaly with timestamps and serials. Take photographs before changing hardware. Share findings with colleagues and insist someone stays with you during after-hours repairs. Consider simple ritual actions if they help staff feel safe, because psychological comfort translates to better decision-making on site. And if you have a story, start your comment with the sequence or the words "banged 3 times" so I can curate similar cases. We read everything, and sometimes the community helps us see patterns we cannot alone. At the end, what remains is not a neat answer, but a set of changed lives and procedures. Mechanical fixes removed error conditions, but did not always heal the feeling of being followed home, or the smell that hangs in a stairwell after hours, or the compulsion some of us had to check that a door was really latched before we drove away. The elevators ran again and passed certification. The coffee machine was replaced and worked as intended. The scaffold was reinforced. But the stories circulated in break rooms and on bulletin boards. People named them to keep a boundary between what they could fix and what they could only respect. If this episode moved you, there are more like it. Subscribe if you want deeper dives into the technical and the uncanny, and tell us your story in the comments. If you have one, start with the floor numbers or the phrase "banged 3 times," and we might feature it. Stay safe at night. Keep your gloves close and your flashlight handy. And one last thing, think twice before playing a game that tells you not to look back, because sometimes what follows is not a ghost, and sometimes it is exactly that.